The ivory silk of my wedding gown felt suddenly heavy, like a shroud. As light as words, "Honey, your parents won't be coming," seeped through the phone and into the very foundations of my day. I stood frozen before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, a vision of a bride I no longer recognized. My stylist, Maria, had just finished her masterpiece. Every curl was a perfect spiral. The delicate pearl-encrusted veil was pinned with precision into my chignon, and the hand-stitched lace on my bodice gleamed under the soft lights of the bridal suite. I should have felt like a queen. Instead, I felt like a ghost. "What do you mean they're not coming?" My voice was a thin, strained thread, so unlike the confident tone I'd practiced for my vows. Lina's sigh was a gust of sympathy from 200 miles away. "They just called the venue," they said. "They said they're attending Adam's championship instead, in Daytona. They're already at the airport." The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. Of course, the two words echoed in the hollowed-out chamber of my chest. A familiar, bitter refrain. My older brother, Adam, their golden child, their prodigy, their son, round whom our entire family galaxy had always revolved, had another car race that weekend. It wasn't even the final championship. It was a qualifying heat. But for my parents, the roar of Adam's engine would always drown out the quiet significance of my milestones. I saw my reflection blur as tears welled, but I blinked them back furiously, refusing to let them mar Maria's artwork. My hands, clad in heirloom lace gloves, began to shake, not from nerves for the promise I was about to make to Thomas, but from the final, devastating confirmation of a truth I'd spent a lifetime trying to outrun. I remembered my college graduation, my father's camera battery conveniently dying right before I walked the stage, because he'd been filming Adam's practice laps all morning. I remembered the sound of my mother's voice, always a few decibels higher, a little more animated, whenever Adam called. My own achievements, the summa cum laude, the promotion, the quiet building of a life with a wonderful man, were like faint pencil sketches next to the bold, permanent marker of Adam's existence. A soft knock came at the door. "Isabella, it's time. Thomas is waiting." The sound of his name was an anchor. Thomas, who saw me, who chose me, who looked at me as if I were the entire universe, not just a distant, fading star. I took a final, long look in the mirror. The woman staring back was heartbroken, yes. The little girl inside her was weeping, abandoned once more on the most important day of her life. But she was also a woman about to make a family of her own. I straightened my spine, the silk rustling in defiance. "I'm coming," I said, my voice steady now, the tremor in my hands finally stilled. My parents had chosen their front row seat at a racetrack over a front row seat at my wedding, and in that painful, clarifying moment, I finally stopped waiting for them to choose me. I picked up my bouquet of white roses, their scent a promise of a new beginning, and walked out of the room to marry the man who already had. Of course, it didn't matter that it was my wedding day, the sacredness of my vows, the culmination of a love story. The white dress I'd so carefully chosen, none of it could compete with the visceral roar of an engine, the smell of burnt rubber, the allure of a checkered flag. In my parents' eyes, Adam's car revving on a sun-baked racetrack to states away was a symphony. My walk down the aisle was merely background noise, a gentle hum easily drowned out. "Hi, I'm Isabella." And that scorching July afternoon was the day the last fragile thread of a daughter's hope finally snapped. It was the day I learned, with a clarity that was both brutal and liberating, that love doesn't always come from the people who are supposed to give it freely. Sometimes you have to become your own wellspring. Growing up, our roles were carved into the family dynamic as if in stone. I was the quiet dreamer, the girl who found solace in the inked worlds of books and the limitless canvas of her own imagination. My art was praised as a cute hobby, my fascination with computers seen as quirky. Adam was the loud achiever, the star whose gravitational pull dictated our family's orbit. Our living room was a shrine to his glory, a gleaming cascade of medals for swimming, football, and later, racing trophies that grew taller and more ornate each year. The air was perpetually thick with the sound of his name, spoken with a reverence my parents reserved for him alone. I can still hear my father's voice, a familiar, dismissive soundtrack to my childhood. He'd clap Adam on the back, his chest puffing with pride. "That's my boy. Adam's going places." Then his gaze would drift to me, curled in the window seat with a programming book, and his tone would flatten into a benign, almost pitying acknowledgement. "And Isabella's just creative." I learned to decode that language early. Creative was not a compliment. It was a synonym for impractical, for fleeting, for not enough. It was the box they built for me, padded with soft expectations and a permanent lack of astonishment. I spent my entire adolescence trying to claw my way out of that box. I got my degree in computer science, not art, thinking tangible success would finally command their attention. I landed a stable, well-paying job as a software architect. I saved and scrimped and bought my own modern townhouse with a view of the city skyline, a testament to my independence and competence. But each accomplishment was met with the same polite, distant interest. A brief, "That's nice, dear," over the phone before the conversation inevitably, inexorably swung back to Adam, his latest sponsorship, his minor crash and brave recovery, the thrilling photo finish in his last race. My promotions and mortgage payments were static, brushed aside like dust on the mantelpiece next to the gleaming monument of Adam's existence. The background noise of my life was forever being tuned out for the main channel. Then, when I got engaged to Ethan, I allowed a flicker of that old, foolish hope to rekindle. I pictured my mother's tearful joy, my father warmly shaking Ethan's hand, but their reaction was a damp, cold blanket smothering the flame. There was no celebration, no excitement, just a long, static-filled pause on the phone. "Are you sure about this, Isabella?" my mother finally asked, her voice laced with a concern she never reserved for Adam's far riskier pursuits. "He seems nice, but maybe you should wait until your career's a bit more stable before taking such a big step." Stable. The word was a punch to the gut. I was a lead software architect, earning more than both of them combined, with a robust investment portfolio and not a cent of debt. But I had long since learned they were not interested in my facts, only in their own fragile narrative, the one where I was perpetually on unsteady ground, a flighty dreamer who needed coddling and cautionary advice. Still, I played the part of the dutiful daughter. I invited them to my wedding, sending those heavy, cream-colored invitations with the elegant script I knew my mother would appreciate. I personally ensured the seats in the very front row were reserved, their names Mr. and Mrs. Giovanni Rossi printed in a delicate gold leaf on little cards. They were to be my anchors, the first faces I saw as I took that solemn walk. But on the big day, as the organ swelled and every head turned towards me, my eyes were irrevocably drawn to those two vacant thrones. They gaped at me, a silent, brutal proclamation of my place in their lives. When well-meaning guests leaned in and whispered, "Where are your parents, dear?" I painted on a serene smile, my voice steady as I spun the lie. "A multi-car pileup on the interstate. They're utterly devastated, stuck in terrible traffic." The words tasted like ash. Ethan's hand was a solid, warm anchor in mine as I walked the rest of the way alone. He squeezed my fingers, his gaze so full of unwavering love it nearly broke me. I married the man of my dreams that day, but the entire ceremony was backlit by the haunting image of that empty front row, a stark void in a day meant to be about wholeness. 3 months later, on my 30th birthday, I tried one last time. I told myself a wedding was a big production. Perhaps it was overwhelming, but a simple, intimate family dinner that they could manage. I spent the entire afternoon cooking my father's favorite osso buco, setting the dining table with meticulous care for Ethan and I, my mother, and my father. I lit candles. I chilled a bottle of expensive Prosecco. The food grew cold. The candles burned down into pools of wax. The ice in the bucket melted, diluting the chilled bottle. The doorbell never rang. The phone never lit up with their number. The 2 places I had set for them remained perfectly untouched. A still life of final, absolute rejection. The next morning, a single text message from my best friend, Sarah, severed the last. frayed connection to the fantasy I had been clinging to. It was a screenshot from my mother's Facebook. There they were, beaming under the bright Florida sun, my father's arm slung around my mother's shoulder. They were both wearing matching, custom-printed team shirts with Adam's crew emblazoned across their chests. My mother was holding a giant foam finger, her face alight with a pure, unadulterated joy I had never seen directed at me. The timestamp on the post was from 3 p.m. the previous day, the exact moment I had been blowing out the solitary candle on the cupcake Ethan had rushed out to buy. The 4-place settings at my table, a monument to my own naivete. That was the day I stopped calling. The line wasn't just dead, I had emotionally buried it. But then, 6 months into the peaceful silence, my phone vibrated with a number I had almost deleted. It was my father. His voice was unnervingly warm, the way it only ever was when he was talking about or needed something for Adam. "Sweetheart, how are you?" he began, the small talk feeling alien and false. He didn't wait for an answer. "Listen, Adam's a little short on funds for his next racing season. The sponsorship fell through. And you know how expensive these tires and engine modifications are. You're doing so well for yourself with that tech job. We were thinking you could help your brother out. It's a real investment." A cold, sharp laugh bubbled in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I looked around the sunlit open-plan space of my fully paid-off townhouse. I thought of the lines of code on my secondary monitor, the mobile payment app I had been building from the ground up, a project that consumed every spare cent and waking hour I had. It was my dream, my creative and impractical vision, now on the cusp of becoming something real. "Sorry, Dad," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I can't." The silence on the other end was immediate and heavy. I could practically hear his worldview cracking. Then came the sigh, a performance of profound disappointment I knew all too well. "Isabella," he said, the false warmth gone, replaced by the cold steel of judgment. "You've always been so selfish. You need to learn that family comes first." The word family hung in the air, toxic and hollow. "Family?" I repeated softly, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. I thought of the 2 empty seats at my wedding, the cold osobuco on my birthday table, the matching Adam's crew shirts. "Yes, Dad, I'm finally learning what that word really means." And before he could reply, I ended the call, the silence in my paid-for home feeling not like loneliness, but like profound, hard-won peace. That call was the final, definitive breaking point. The shards of my need for their approval fell away, and in their place was a cold, focused fire. I poured everything, the hurt, the anger, the quiet determination into my app. My world became a blur of late-night coding sessions, early morning meetings, and endless cups of coffee. Ethan was my rock, my sole cheerleader in an empty stadium, believing in me with a ferocity that filled the silence my family had left. And a year later, that relentless work exploded into a reality I could never have dreamed of while sitting in my childhood window seat. My app, a sleek solution for peer-to-peer payments, went viral. We hit over 800,000 users in 3 dizzying months. Then came the offer. A major tech conglomerate wanted to acquire it for $2.3 million. The first thing I bought wasn't an investment property or a stock portfolio. It was a Tesla Model X Plaid, a sleek, obsidian black beast that cost $120,000. It wasn't just a car. It was a monument, my own silent, electric roar of satisfaction. 2 weeks later, I navigated its whisper-quiet engine to the familiar curb of my parents' house for Adam's annual birthday barbecue. The moment the sleek vehicle glided into their driveway, the entire backyard party froze. The chatter died, the sizzle of the grill seemed to hush, and all eyes turned to the unfamiliar, expensive machine, and the woman stepping out of it. My mother was the first to break the silence. Her voice a fragile thing. "Isabella, this is your car." I smiled, the expression feeling new and powerful on my face. "Yes, Mom, mine." My father approached slowly, circling the Tesla as if it were a mirage. "You can't afford this," he stated, his old script kicking in automatically. "Did Ethan buy it for you?" "No," I said, my gaze steady. My company dead. My mother blinked, utterly lost. Company, and there, on their manicured lawn, surrounded by Adam's friends and their faded racing banners, I told them. I laid out the entire story, the app, the acquisition, the multi-million-dollar deal, the media coverage they had missed while their attention was laser-locked on Adam's mid-tier racing career. I watched their faces shift through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, dawning guilt, and profound confusion. "We're so proud of you," my mother suddenly blurted, her tone clangingly sweet. A complete rewrite of history. "You should have told us." I looked at her, at the desperate plea in her eyes, and I felt nothing but a vast, quiet calm. "I did," I replied, my voice soft but clear as glass. "For years. You just weren't listening." A week later, my phone lit up with her name again. This time, the subject line wasn't Adam. "Honey," she began, "maybe you and Ethan can come over for dinner soon. We'd love to reconnect." I stared at the screen, at the invitation that had come a decade too late. I thought of the empty seats, the cold dinner, the matching team shirts. "Maybe another time," I typed back, and meant it. For years, I had tried to prove my worth to them. Now, I didn't need to. I had finally learned that you don't need to earn a seat at a table you were never welcome at. Not when you've already built your own kingdom. The best revenge wasn't anger. It was a success so loud, they had no choice but to finally hear it. And in that silence after I declined their invitation, I found a peace they could never give me and could never take away.